Hey Mixed Church, happy Sunday. So glad you could join us today on this Memorial Weekend. Wherever and whenever you're watching this, with family or friends, we're glad you could join us online. And if you haven't been plugged in or haven't joined Mixed Church yet, we would love for you to connect with us. And you can do this by filling out the form or connecting with us with the link below. And you can also go on the Mixed Church app and join us that way. Before we dive into the sermon, I would like to let you guys know of a couple things that are happening here at Mixed Church. First one being Summer Hangs. So this is going on through all summer. And some of these events are anything from coffee shopping, which I'm biased for because that's what I lead, where we get to try out different coffee shops each week, to backyard hangs, where we get to have bonfires and just have a good time talking to each other, to even volleyball on Friday nights. Whether you've been looking at a group to join, Summer Hangs is a great opportunity to kind of get plugged in with Mixed Church. And another thing that's happening within the Mixed community is on June 10th, we have I Love My City, where here at Mixed Church, we get to partner with Milwaukee organizations and help serve our city. So we have organizations like Habitat for Humanity, CareNet, One Hope, and Hope Street that you can all be able to serve at and do various activities. All right, now that you guys are all caught up, let's lean into the conversation we have today.
What's up, Mix fam? Are you gonna be all right?
I don't know.
Happy Memorial Day weekend. It's me. It's Jake. And we are doing something a little interesting. And in all honesty, this is an audible. We're an honest church, or we aspire to be honest, which makes it sound like we sometimes lie.
Yeah.
We try to be honest. We don't always hit the mark.
Oh,
and already, I'm just going to have to apologize for my voice. It's coming back, but it's going to be a little bit lower than usual, which is making my guests feel very uncomfortable, and that's okay. But anyways, we had to call an audible. The plan for this weekend was to do a Q&R, and so we solicited for questions, and with the hopes that we would take a bunch of those questions, sum them all up into themes, and then have a conversation about those questions. Well, we didn't really get many responses. In fact, we only got 3. And so that's not condemning anyone or shaming anyone, but also it did not necessarily provide enough content to run with. And I did not want, because we try to be honest around here, I didn't want to lie and be like, so we got this question, Jake.
Make up and ask yourself questions. Yeah.
Jake, I've always wondered, have you always been good looking? So, okay, let me address that question real quick. No, so we didn't get enough questions, and so we decided to do an audible, and I got to thinking of what we could do, and I'll just be honest, today is my idea. And so, for better or worse, This is how we're rolling. What we're doing is we're doing a little special Memorial Day weekend mixed bag. And if you know anything about the Mixed Bag podcast, it's that the mission of the Mixed Bag podcast is to help you navigate through the mixed bag that is life. And so today I've got a guest, Stephanie Granlick, in the house. And if you don't know Stephanie, well, that's just great, because that's what this podcast is all about. Stephanie Granlick has been the worship coordinator for Mixed Church for how many years?
In some capacity for about 12 years.
12 years, long time. And you also have been evolving in your role within the last year. You have gone on from, you're still worship coordinator, but you have preached now, and you will be a regular communicator at Mixed Church. You're up on the docket in July. And then on top of that, you are now overseeing our groups. And so with all of that, I thought it would be a great opportunity to just allow our community, that of Mixed Church, to get to know you a little bit better. You are one of the most prominent voices on a Sunday morning, typically, in that you're leading worship. So that alone, I think, merits just a little bit of getting to know you. And then also, both you and Austin are just incredible core people to the mission of Mixed Church, and so as you're growing in your capacity and your role within the ministry, I just want our people to get to know you, because Jackie and I have just gotten to know you, and we love you guys, and I know that there's a lot that the Lord has been doing in your life over the last 12 years. I've only been a part of it for the last 2.5, 3 years ish. We bumped into each other at Metro Market 4 years ago, I think. And we kind of knew who each other were. And anyways, that's what the Mixed Bag is all about. It's all about wasting
time at random stories. It's perfect.
So I've got 3 questions that I'm going to ask you, and but before that, let's do something unscripted. What's something good that you've been reading?
Ooh, something good I've been reading. Been reading a book by Levi Lusko called The Last Supper on the Moon, which is...
Oh, wow. I know nothing about this
crazy.
book, only that the title sounds like the best title of a book ever.
It's very interesting. It's like he's obsessed with, I shouldn't say obsessed. He's very, very intrigued with the whole idea of the moon landing and everything that went into it, and he kind of like geeked out on it. But he's like
That
tying
didn't
it.
happen.
No, it's
That's
not a
the
conspiracy theory book.
That's not the angle. I'm not interested
No.
in.
Oh my gosh. No, it's very interesting. He breaks down like Jesus's 7 I am statements through the crucifixion, and then like parallels them with stuff about
With Neil Armstrong. So Jesus said it this
my
way,
gosh,
but this is how
the
Neil
worst.
would have put it.
This is like
You're
the
never
worst.
going to be able to take the book seriously.
You guys, the book's great. Anyway, I'm like 3/4 of the way through it. It's actually really good. It's a massive book though.
Did he co-write that with Brooke Lidgertwood, or was she just a part of, or did they just do an interview? I thought I had seen them.
She
do
had
something.
written the album, and a lot of her album was influenced by the other book that
Neil
I had just
Armstrong.
no, the other book that I had just read, which was Discipleship on the Edge by Dale Johnson,
Okay.
which is like it's an expository journey through Revelation.
Yeah.
It's massive and
If your
it's
name's
so
Dale
good.
if your name's Dale Johnson.
Daryl.
Daryl. Oh,
Yes.
man.
Even
I thought
better.
it was Dale.
No.
Even Daryl Johnson.
Daryl Johnson.
It's-
But
I bet it's riveting.
it actually is. It's fantastic. But again, massive book. But it goes through like all of Revelation, and it's really intense. But it's so good. And so they were a lot of Levi Lusko stuff references a lot of stuff from Revelation and like the letters to the churches and stuff. So they both were just working on massive projects that had a lot to do with that, and they're good friends. So then they did like a I don't know if it was like a podcast or what they did, but she was talking about her album, he was talking about his book, and they were just picking each other's brains. That's probably what you saw, because they came out around the same time.
Nice.
Her album 7 and then his book. So. Yeah.
Nice. Second
That's good.
question that's unscripted is how, in 3 words, how would you describe the last 12 years of life in ministry? And then that'll get us going into some questions that I think we're going to be able to unearth some wisdom and insight. But how would you describe the last 12 years in 3 words or less?
Dang. The same way I describe life with my children. Sweet, beautiful chaos.
Oh man, that's really awesome.
Yes.
That's how you would describe
Sweet,
life with kids?
Beautiful chaos. Yeah.
Man, that's great.
It's kind of what ministry feels like a lot of the time. It's beautiful, but it's also really intense and
Yep, and it's
hard
sweet.
and sweet and
Also want to punch
beautiful.
you in the face. Not you,
Exactly.
but ministry.
Not your children, but yeah. Yes, that would be a good
That's
one.
killer. Well, I think that sets us up for question number 1 because looking back over the last 12 years of ministry, you've had a ton of experience in very various capacities. And the church has gone through a lot of transition. I mean, since its very beginning, which
Right.
most churches do. And so, first question is 3 lessons, 3 lessons that you've learned in the last 12 years.
Okay. You want all 3 up front, or do you want one?
Give me
at a
the
time?
first one. Let's go first one.
Okay. First one was something I had to remind myself often was there's no job description for loving Jesus.
Wow. There's no job description for loving Jesus. I'll just start with say more about that.
Yeah. Well, for one, like right after I got saved in college, the atmosphere that I was in, it was very like, no one ever said this, but my assumption was if you actually really love Jesus, you'll be in ministry, which is not fair.
Oh, wow.
And so I think there was a part
Oh,
of
I see where you're going with this. This is great.
I think there was a part of me that was like, well, if I actually want to live this out, then that's what you do, is you go into ministry, which I think there wasn't like necessarily a place for me in ministry yet. And I was very involved in the church and started leading worship, but I wasn't like on staff in any capacity necessarily. And so I think there was this assumption that like, once I get on staff or once I am able to do that in a greater capacity, then I'll actually be like doing this for real, rather than just being content in the season I was in and doing as much as I could. But like, we were newly married and we had young babies, and there was like, I can't wait until I can actually love Jesus fully by being in ministry fully. And it, like, yeah, navigating that. And then also like, it's just very unfair for people who are called to a regular job outside of ministry, and like, as if that's lesser than. And so, yeah.
Quick point. You said young babies. Are you referring to those who have old babies like Benjamin Button? It was not.
They were young
It was
babies.
not a real movie.
Not old babies.
So Steph believes that we
'cause
actually
they're
landed
still
on the
my
moon.
babies. That's what I mean.
I think that's great. I think that is a very common assumption, especially in ministry, where, like I think you said it this way, was like, if you love Jesus and you really love Jesus, you'll end up being in full-time ministry
Right.
or highly involved
Right.
in the church, which is not biblical at all, and can be very, very deceptive. I remember when we planted a church back in 2018, I ran into a guy at a gym or something like that, older gentleman, and I told him that I was a pastor, and he was like, "Ooh, that's a high calling." And I don't know if I said this to him in the moment, but I definitely thought it afterwards. I was like, "No, it's just my calling." Like, yes, like I understand what you're trying to say, like, but I think that can be very dangerous. Dig into that a little bit more, and maybe even just speak to our community, because the majority of our community is not involved in ministry. I mean, we have volunteer leaders, like our team leads, who are amazing. Team
Yeah.
leads like Des and Cole and Elizabeth and Mel and numerous others. And then we have a very, very small part of our church that is actually employed by church.
Right.
And even in there, it's like we have 2 full-time employees, and then we have numerous stipend, which varies across the
Right.
board, and how many hours per se a person is dedicating to working for the church. But the majority of our church is not employed by the church. What would you hope that they get and embrace about their unique calling as a follower of Jesus?
I think like sometimes ministry is looked at, I have found, like it's my job to love Jesus, and it's harder for other people who aren't in ministry to love Jesus, which I think there's like a tricky thing to navigate when you're in ministry, when like doing the things of God is your work, but you also want to have your relationship with God outside of that. I think there's, like you were talking about, like, not that it's a higher calling, it's just different, and there's grace for you wherever you're called to be. And so, like, if you are not in ministry, I think following Jesus, like, there's less of, like, there's maybe less accountability,
Yep.
but we're doing the same things. We should be doing the same
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Like, I have things within my job description that I'm doing throughout the week, but reading my I don't read my Bible because I'm in ministry. I don't.
It's also not in your job. I actually don't think I put that in
No,
your job.
you
Maybe I should.
No, but, like,
I did put in, you do have an expectation that you are pursuing a vibrant personal
Yes.
relationship with Jesus.
exactly.
So-
But, like, I don't do
But
that
you don't get to
because
count your
it's in my
hours.
job
You don't get to
description.
clock in when you do devos.
Exactly,
Eunice
yeah.
isn't over there. All right, let's clock in, and now I'm reading
Yeah.
my utmost for his highest.
Now
I
it's
know.
time. I'm gonna pray for 2 hours today because, yeah. But I don't know, like, doing those things are important if you're in ministry, obviously, because they're important to following
Yeah,
Jesus.
it's very good.
So, like, yes, we may have more capacity to do those things, but because I'm reading the Bible for my own personal growth and for what I'm gonna bring if I'm
Yes.
teaching or, whatever. So, like, we may be doing more of those things, but it's not because that's what we have to do to be in ministry. We're doing those things because we're following Jesus, and that's what it
Yes.
looks like to follow Jesus. And so I think sometimes people who aren't in ministry may, and even when I wasn't, like, in ministry in the capacity that I am, like, comparing myself, like, how many books am I reading and whatever, like, pursuing Jesus should look the same for all of us.
Yes.
It's it's the spiritual disciplines, it's following Jesus, it's acts of obedience. It's like, it's the same for all of us. And so I think people do themselves a disservice when they compare themselves to someone in ministry and think, oh, well, they're reading all those books because they're in ministry, they have to. It's like, no, like, just
Yeah.
because you don't have a job description that requires you to put a message together, like, know the word because you want to know God,
Yeah.
not because you want to be able to teach it necessarily,
Yeah, there's a really interesting tension with that, because in one part you hit on it is, like, there is a built-in human accountability. Like, we are all accountable to God, and we are all, like, called to follow Jesus, like you were saying. But in ministry, it adds a human accountability to where I think about this often, and I don't know if I think it's a blessing and a burden, where it's like, well, one part it's a blessing because, like, dude, I just think through my actions a lot more just because I
Yeah.
know, like, I when I worked at an internet marketing company, I did not care
Yeah.
what pictures might show up on Facebook of me at a bar or something like that, like, because there was no accountability
Right.
in that part. Whereas with church, it's like, need to be very much more mindful about certain things and how it can impact other people's lives, and so that's a good thing I think.
Yeah.
But it could be a bad thing, because if that's the driving force for why I don't do things or why I do things, well, then it's very possible to have a religious, I'm just being religious, and I'm not
Yes.
necessarily doing it with Jesus,
Totally. Which I think is the other thing that I've learned is, like, the difference of working with God versus working for God. Like, I think it's like that tricky, like, slippery slope when you're in ministry. Is like, am I doing this because this is what I need to be doing to follow Jesus, or am I doing this because it's what I should be doing? If you're a pastor, I should be doing this, whatever. So, like, just actually having a relationship with Jesus that is outside of for other people.
Yeah.
And, like, there's been seasons where it's super hard, where it's like, I should probably pray more since I'm leading worship tomorrow, but I don't feel like it right
Yeah.
now. And everyone has those moments of, like, I don't feel like praying right now, or I feel more distant from God, and these seasons where you're wrestling through things, but, like, am I wrestling through this because I need to wrestle through this and like
Yeah.
check my own heart before God, or am I wrestling through it so that I can communicate better on
Yes,
Sunday?
that's
Am
great,
I
yep.
reading the Word because I want to consistently be hearing from God, or am I reading because I have to share something on Sunday? I need to find something to share.
Yep.
So it's, yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
then,
hard to
you know, Paul
navigate
talks about this, and I think this is the word we'll wrap up this first lesson. But you know, where we are all created, we are all the handiwork of God, the masterpiece of God, created in advance to do the good works that He planned for us. And I hope that this would be an encouragement to our community that like you are just as called as Steph. You are just as called as
Yeah.
me or Eunice or Jackie or Abe or whoever. And let that like motivate you that like you've been created to do good works, and maybe yours are never going to really be focused on, you know, the inside of the four walls of a church. That makes it no less of a calling with Jesus. All right, hit us
Yeah.
with lesson number 2. I'm just gonna let you know you set the bar high on that first one. Like, so I'm like,
Oh, that's funny.
there is no job description for following and loving Jesus. That's really great.
Second one is, if He's not in it, I don't want it.
He's not in it. I don't want it.
Yeah.
We're working on a mixed single there.
Yeah.
If he's not in
This is where I'm like,
I don't want
try
it.
not to make them
I
really
don't
cheesy
want
taglines.
anything without you.
Look at that. On the fly. This is what songwriting is like with Jake, guys. It's fun and
And then it always
interesting.
ends. And then it always ends with a. All right. Drink some of your grape juice, and then.
It's actually water now.
Oh, okay.
My grape coffee. Shout out Stone Creek. Juicy grape.
If he's not in it, I don't want it. Give us a little idea of where that's kind of coming from.
This is funny. Over the last few years, especially with a lot of transition, I was going back and reading through a lot of my journals as we were trying to navigate like being on ministry and when we first went into ministry, and just over and over again, like I was hesitant to even share this because I like don't want this to sound prideful, but reading back through it, I was blessed reading my own words of like just how pure my heart was in it. Because I think sometimes when we have a desire that we think is from the Lord, but then somewhere along the way we get so focused on the thing rather than like the why of why we felt like God was calling us to it. Just reading back through it like over and over again of like I desired to lead worship. I always felt like there was a call on my life to do that, and I desired to be in ministry, but just like consistently checking my own heart of like that would be awesome, and it would be a great calling. Like, what a cool thing to be able to do that. Like, you know, to look at that and be like, oh yeah, doing that as obviously something that will bless God's heart, but not necessarily if He's not calling you to it. And so just consistently checking my motives. Like, if He's not in this, I don't want to do it just because on the outside it looks like a Christian thing to do. It looks like it would be something that would bring God glory. And like, I think so often we can do things that look like they would honor God. But if our heart is not close to Him, and if it's not like, if He's not blessing it, it's not what He's calling you to do, it doesn't matter if it looks good from the outside. Like, if He's not in it, I don't want to do it. And like, if He's not blessing something, I don't want to pursue it just because it looks like the churchy thing to do, or the like this is what worship leaders do, or whatever it might be. Yeah, I think just consistently, like David, like search my heart. Like, I really don't want to be doing these things just because I think that's the right thing. Like, if he's not it, and I don't want it.
Yeah, you had brought up kind of the idea of feeling called to it and feeling like in a God-given desire and a longing to do something for God.
Yeah.
But then it sounded like there was a tension with whether or not that's what God wanted for you. Do you have a specific season in mind, where you sensed you were called to blank? The opportunity was not in front of you, and wrestling with that and what that was like?
Yeah. More the first 10 years of ministry for Austin and I, really, I should say like 8 or so, was we both felt called to ministry. We felt called to this church specifically. And just navigating, like, it just feels like after 8 years, if this was what God was calling us to do, he would have made a way by now. It just felt like, are we hearing wrong? Are we just being impatient? 8 years doesn't feel like that's impatient. I feel like we've waited a long, just trying to navigate that. And, I've always felt like eventually I wanted to be in full-time ministry, and I like felt called to that. But then being content in the seasons along the way, like right now, at certain seasons, it was like right now my full-time job is being a stay-at-home mom, and I'm able to serve in a certain capacity, but also feeling like something that I know God has called me to is to lead worship. So why am I not able to step into that? Why is that door not being open in the way, like, especially when people around me, people in leadership were in agreement? It just felt like, what is happening? But there's also just so much, like, I think that going back to like what I had said before too, like the title of being on staff as a worship leader did not mean that I was not acting in that capacity, you know? Like the job description didn't make it more true of me. I was still leading people in worship, and that was still something that I was called to do, whether I had that as a title or not.
Yeah, let's dig into this, because I think that this is not, again, with all of these things, you're bringing up ministry-specific examples because that's your paradigm.
Right.
But none of these are ministry exclusive concepts.
Yeah.
Because again, like, God calls us and he gives us desires and longings to do things for his kingdom. And so I would imagine that your experience is similar to a ton of people's experience. I mean, I can, dig into my own a little bit, where there's this friction of having, man, I feel really passionate about this, feel really called, but it's not happening for whatever reason.
Right.
What encouragement would you give to someone who is like, man, I really felt like God has placed this on my heart to do this or be that, but it's not happening? What are some things that you would encourage them with and challenge them with?
I think the biggest thing for me was just keeping my heart pure and being very honest about my own motives, because I felt as though a lot of what I was wrestling with was having the recognition of being the thing I wanted to be, rather than like I might be only able to operate in a certain capacity of this in this season, but that doesn't make it any less beautiful. Like specifically in like, I may only be able to lead worship on Sundays and not give more of my time throughout the week, but like, that's okay. Then I'm going to do that with a pure heart, and I'm going to consistently check my heart and know that like, I may not be recognized, I might not be paid for it, I might not be like, I might not have a title for it, but like, if it really is something that I feel God is calling me to do for him and unto him, then it doesn't matter if I'm not getting recognized for it. It doesn't matter if I don't have a title for it. And I think now looking back, I'm glad it didn't happen sooner than it did, because I think learning to do it without being seen made it that much easier to do it with a pure heart now.
Very good. Yeah. Have you read Tale of Three Kings?
No.
Man, super small little book. I recommend this to anyone who, I mean, it can be very easily applied to ministry, but again, I think it can be applied to life. But it's I don't know how you would describe it, a dramatization of the life of David, from anointing to be king, and then I think it goes
Anointing to
through,
appointing.
yeah, and then all the way through he's king, and to the later part of his life where Absalom is trying to kill him. But anyways, so there's a lot of stuff that the book is not scriptural, but it's kind of like the Chosen series, which I haven't watched yet. Everyone tells me you need to watch it. You need to
Love
watch
it.
The Chosen.
Comparing it to it, but you haven't
But
seen
it's
it.
just, but I know the concept
From what
of The
you've heard,
Chosen.
yeah,
I know
yeah.
that there's a lot of heretical stuff in it. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot of reading between the lines and
Yes.
conversations where John's having a conversation with Jesus that probably did not take place. Anyway, so that's what's happening in the book. And time and again, I think David says this maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the book, where he comes to a point where, for instance, he's been anointed to be king. He's not yet king. Saul's trying to kill him. And there's a moment where his David's boys, his mighty warriors are like, dude, kill him, be king. And he says something along the lines of he's like, no. First of all, he's like, that is God's anointed one, Saul.
Yeah.
And also, I'm not going to fight for this.
Right.
God called
Yeah.
me to it. If it's his, he'll give it to me. He'll walk
Right.
me into it.
Right.
And then there's a full circle moment, because that happens early on in the book, and then towards the end of the book, where again I think David's on the run, and he says the exact same thing, where he's talking about fighting for it, and
Yeah.
his advisors are like, you got to protect this, you have to defend your title as king. And he's like,
Yeah.
whoa. And he's able to look back and he's able to say, I didn't fight to earn this, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to fight to keep it.
Yes. That's good.
And I just think that is such a powerful paradigm, because I think of calling, and again, everyone's got a calling, and we have numerous callings. There are people that are listening you feel called to start a family, but it's
Right.
not happening. And you're like, what's going on here? You feel called to be in leadership, and you feel like the Lord has anointed you to be a leader. Great. Or to speak, or to sing, or you feel like you've got more in you than your job is currently creating space for you to experience. And it's like, okay, I would say man, in some of those ways, that might be a calling from God. And my encouragement would be hey, congratulations. God has given you something that the first purpose is for you just simply to offer it back to him.
Right.
That's, yes, the fruition of it may, I think that there are plenty of times where God calls us to things, gives us longings, and we will never, there's I think we preach a bad gospel when we're like, man, if he placed it in you, he will be true to his word. And it's yes, he will be true to his word, but did he promise you that you are absolutely going to do that? Or did he just
Right.
give you a desire and give you just a longing so that you
Yeah.
could then offer it back to Jesus and say,
And
okay,
take you on a journey that's
yes.
going to draw you closer.
And it may
to
have
him,
nothing
and
to
that was the
do with
purpose.
you
Yeah.
experiencing your dream.
Right. I think that's where we often, I remember when I first became a Christian and hearing the verse, God gives you the desires of your heart, and being like, well, if you desire it, then it must be something that he's going to bless you with. And it's
Yeah.
no. That's saying he will literally rewrite the desires
Yeah.
and give you new desires.
You will want things that
he's
you did
going
not
to,
want.
Yes, he's going to create new desires in your heart. He's going to give you
Yeah.
whatever you desire.
Yeah, and even then, I think just digging in that, because thinking about my own story, when I was coming out of the darkest point of my life, which was back in 2013, 14, was really kind of dedicating my life back to Christ after really just falling away and being spiritually stagnant. I remember in rededicating myself, like I knew that I was called to ministry. I did not in that moment want it or have any desire. There was no like burning, like, oh, I just want to be in ministry. No, there was like, to your point, like there was a desire that God had given me where I was like, I don't even like want this in the shallow way of saying that like it excites me. I'm not excited, but yet like I want it because I know that it's what God wants for me,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Take us to lesson number 3.
I don't even remember. Ooh. Can I get a little spicy?
Sure. I'm all about spicy. It's Memorial Day. Hey, we're not in front of an audience, man. You know,
Oh, yeah.
what are they going to do?
Whatever. So funny. No, I think specifically through the pandemic and then in, the years since, I've realized just like how real church hurt can be. But that the people that I've talked with most that I've experienced the most church hurt are people that were relying on the church to be something that Jesus is meant to be. Relying on pastors and leaders to be something for them that they were never meant to be, and that and fill roles in their life that only God was meant to fill. Church hurt is real. Like, leaders fail, people experience, unmet expectations, and the church is full of broken people. So we're gonna get hurt, and that's gonna happen, and obviously we strive not to have that, but I think the deepest church hurt happens when we expect others to be perfect, and when we expect others to lead us in a capacity that only God can. And so when leaders fail, when we've put them in a position of and I'm not speaking necessarily about our church, but just the church globally, especially in the last few years with so many scandals and things coming out, people being held to a standard, in some sense they should be held to a standard, and then they fail, it's wrong. But when we begin to view leaders, rather than them being leaders, they become this I'm following so-and-so rather than following Jesus. And so when that person fails, suddenly your faith crumbles, which I get. It's hard to wrestle through that stuff, and I understand asking questions because of leaders failing you or because of hurt, and that's, hurt is very different than abuse too. So I'm not but experiencing church hurt is bound to happen because the church is just full of people, but being able to wrestle through that and not allowing that to change your perspective of God. And I experienced that through the pandemic, and over the last few years wrestling with stuff from 10 years ago that I never really wrestled through. But I think a lot of people within the church globally over the last few years have been wrestling through that, and it's really sad to me to see how many people who have been hurt and have a right to feel hurt rather than wrestling through it are putting that onto God, and it's allowing them to change their perspective of who He is. Just really sad.
Yeah, it's very sad, and it's difficult. I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I do think that in some ways, and I know that I've been guilty of this, where I think churches do perpetuate the mentality, because it's like, and where's the line? I don't know. I think it's a wisdom, and I think it's an awareness thing that we have to have, where it's hey, God has given us influence. God has given us some sense of authority where we have this opportunity to speak into people's lives and challenge them. And then we also have this perspective where I'm hey, like Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ.
Right. Yeah.
And we're hey, come on. And then we hurt people and we make mistakes. And then I think sometimes the worst maybe way of responding is like, well, you shouldn't have been looking to me.
No.
What were you doing? It's like,
Right.
Wait,
Yeah.
I thought you told me I should trust you.
Yes. If there's no accountability, there's no ownership of it.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, what we
that's a
see
problem.
happening, especially in American culture, is like we do see pastors like going out of their way to build audiences and build influence and live like they're in the spotlight,
Yeah.
even beyond the fact that we get 35 to 50 minutes on a Sunday morning in front of an audience ranging from 50 to, whatever. I mean, look at some of these global ministries where they're reaching,
Right.
millions of people, where it's just like, even outside of that, we're trying to get in people's ears. And so I think that there is like for those who have been hurt by church leaders, it's really loud in the background, so sorry. But we're here at Expansive, and we love it here. I think that there is empathy for people where it's like, oh, I totally get that.
Yeah.
And that's not
for
on
sure.
you. Like, that's just,
Yes.
and I think maybe like a helpful thing is like talking about church hurt is like it might be helpful just to like, hey, stop talking about church hurt. It's just hurt.
Yes. It's
And
relational
there's-
hurt.
yeah.
And you have every right to be hurt.
Oh my gosh, yep.
Every right. But you also don't let that get in the way of you pursuing Jesus.
Yeah.
And don't let that hold you back. Like forgiveness and like wrestling through that. And yes, find a healthy leader that you can follow. And yes, like if it's really unhealthy, moving on. Like I get all of that.
Yeah.
It makes me really sad when I see people who have been hurt and they choose to walk away
Yeah.
from Jesus because of that. Because
Yeah, and that doesn't have anything to do with church. That has everything to do with Jesus' words on forgiveness.
yes,
Again, it's just like, it's brutal, but like some of Jesus' most brutal, like super harsh teachings were about forgiveness.
right?
Where Jesus literally said, if you don't forgive, you won't be forgiven.
Right.
If you don't free
don't like
people up.
that idea.
Yeah, dude, it's like,
Yeah.
that's really, really harsh. And so it's like, what you're saying, it's like, man, yes, you've been hurt. And this is, I'm not going to be one of those pastors that's like, come on, get over it. It's like, no.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we've got to wrestle with the hurt, and there's accountability that needs to happen.
Right.
And I've got pretty strong thoughts on what I think, for pastors who have violated the trust of people and how much trust they should be given in the future. But it's not, this podcast's not
Yeah.
about that.
That's not good. Yeah.
But as with every single type of hurt that we experience, I don't know who said this, and I think it's maybe a riff off of a different quote where it's just like, hurt is a, hurt, how do they say that? Like, offense is it's like it's an experience. Like, it's something that happens to you. Like, healing is a decision, and being hurt. And this is super painful, but like,
Staying hurt.
yeah, staying hurt, like, that's a decision. But back to your point, like, let's now swing it in the other direction. What would you say to people? And maybe let's just talk to our mixed community kids. We're not
Yeah.
pastoring the entire world. We're just pastoring the people that the Lord has brought into our community.
Yeah.
Let's talk about healthy expectations of ministry and church leadership. Like,
Yeah.
okay, well, what should I expect of my pastors? And like, how should I like respond, or should I prepare myself to be hurt? Like, or
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think the one good thing that's come over the last few years of a lot of nonsense within the church is like the amount of accountability for leaders, because I think that's a good thing, that we should be held accountable to a different standard, 100%. I feel like from my experience in ministry, one of the hardest things for me is when I've held myself to a standard of being everyone's best friend. Because, no, like, we want to have healthy relationships with people in the church, but healthy relationships for leaders looks like having a few people that you're very close with and a few people that you're accountable to, and having great relationship with a lot of people, but not everyone's going to be our best friends. Not everyone's
Yep.
going to be meeting up once a week for coffee, you know, like creating a culture where people have community, they have accountability, they have people that are surrounding them, but that doesn't necessarily have to be someone from staff or that's, you know, in leadership. Because in the same way that we desire for every single person in our church to be healthy, that starts with us being healthy. And when we like create a culture where people are dependent on us, that's not good for anyone, and it like stretches us thin. I think one of the things that you guys have modeled really well is just being like very, very honest with where, like, I think transparency within leadership and being quick to like admit failure, even when it's the small things. I don't think that can be like, I think it's very underestimated, I guess. Even, I don't know, you're probably going to hate this because now it's going to turn into me talking about how awesome you are. No, a few weeks ago when you you got up on stage during your message and you talked about how you had been unclear the week before.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you took a minute to just like go back and clarify. I think moments like that, even in the little things, like being willing to do that, like the trust that it builds, knowing that like you have people in your life that are holding you accountable for what you say. Not every single person in our church has that relationship with you, and that's okay, but like knowing that you have those relationships and knowing that like those of us in leadership have those relationships of accountability is so important. Because I think when we try and spread ourselves too thin and be really close to everyone, that's what disappears first, is having those like really real relationships, the people
Yes.
who really know you and can really hold you accountable.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I think that's what I would want for anyone. You know, everybody at Mix is going to be here temporarily. Everyone's going to leave at some point. And so a great paradigm for how to gauge your experience at Mix is to think about what to look for in the next church that you go to. And I think that's a really good thing to look for. And it's certainly, yes, it's something that Jackie and I have tried, and we try to be, you know, conscious of, is like, are we being honest with our church? Because I think, here's the deal. Church hurt is inevitable. It is going to happen. You are going to get hurt by someone. Like, this is God's plan, his hope for the world, and it is built up by imperfect individuals. And so you are going to get hurt. I think instead of thinking about like, well, how do we prevent this? It's like when people are like, how do we prevent, you know, and they list off this scandal. And they're like, yeah, you know, you brought up accountability, and it's always like, well, that's what happens when they're not accountable. Dude, that person has like 3 super close friends. They're all pastors. They have a board. They have advisors. Like if you're going to screw up, you're going to screw up. Like,
Right, yeah.
That's kind of the whole part of lying, is that you lie to people. Like, and so, well, they should have been held accountable. Right, but your board can't, like, they can ask you questions.
They're not following you around like,
Like, and that's just really, really sucky. But anyways, like, so there's going to be hurt, but like, think, like, looking for how do you limit unnecessary hurt. And I think that there are, you know, there are people, there are leaders, there are churches where it's like the writing is on the wall, it seems, to where you're like, dude, and one of the things that just comes to my mind is like, does this look like a facade? Like, does the leadership, does it look like they go out of their way to like present an image to you? And it's like,
speak
again,
differently based
like,
on the room they're in and who's there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think like for our church, it's like, no, like I don't air all my dirty laundry on Sunday mornings, but what I would hope is that anyone who talks to someone that's especially on staff, I try to live in such a way and communicate in such a way that the people that are closest to me we'll be able to say, oh, like he's real. He's not right. I love what Craig Rochelle, says, like, people will follow a leader who's real, not the one that's always right.
Right. Yep.
And so it's like, ding, ding, ding. Like, if you're in a relationship, and here's again, let's just zoom out of ministry. We're just talking about relationships in general.
Yes.
Like, are you growing in intimacy with someone who always has to be right, who always has to look right, who always has to end the conversation right? It's like, ding, ding, ding. Like, regardless of whether that person is wrong, like, that person's probably, like, that relationship is probably going to get really, really toxic, And so, anyways, all right. Was that your third lesson? That was. First lesson was, let's see how good my memory is. There's no job description for following Jesus.
Yeah.
Second lesson was, if God's not in it, I don't want it. And then the third one was, how did you sum up this last one?
I don't know. What's a good way to wrap it up? Like, church hurt is real, but like, don't allow it to get in the way of you pursuing Jesus.
Yes, and I would say that for
Wrestle
anyone
with
that I've
it.
hurt. Like,
Yes.
that's the big thing. It's like, it's not us like saying get over it. It's like, no.
Oh, gosh,
It's
no.
just like, no, please, like, rededicate yourself to the body of Christ. Please, like,
Yeah.
okay, because I've hurt people, and I've had people come to me and
Yes.
say, I've hurt them, and I've
Yes.
fallen on my sword. Here's the thing. I can't fix what I did. I can't
Yes.
make it better.
Yes.
And here's what I would say. Oh, but please don't hold this against Jesus.
Exactly. And I think that's where it's the saddest for me, is like, where mistakes that I may have made or stood by and watched be made, to think that that is getting in the way of someone following Jesus. Like, church hurt goes both ways too. I think a lot of people in ministry have been hurt realizing that, like, my motives were pure, but I was wrong. And now, because of my failure, someone else is, like, not following Jesus, when the whole reason I got into this was to help people to follow Jesus. And so, like, even just this idea of, like, believing the best, even when people fail you, like, being willing to forgive them and hope, like, that they are able to repent, deal with their own crap, and that they will follow Jesus, and like, holding that over someone else is like allowing that to define them forever too.
Yes. And this is where I almost wish that everyone could have a little bit of an, like, lean into the perspective that we do get as people who are in ministry, where it's like, there's a point in every person's journey in ministry, if they're employed by a church, that you have to say, okay, like, I've just got to follow Jesus for myself, and I'm not going to delegate this to someone else. Whereas, like, when you're not in ministry, it's very easy to delegate certain responsibilities or certain needs that only Jesus can meet to your pastor. Cool. Let's do rapid fire round. 2 last questions here. First question is, dig into, and if we need to break, I know we're here at Expansive. It's a great place.
There's a lot
but people are moving
happening.
around. We're good. 5 minutes. So we're gonna wrap this up in 5 minutes. You got it, boss. Oh, great. Okay, cool. 2 questions. Regrets. What's one of the regrets that you have in the last 12 years? And hopefully you have some.
Yeah, I do.
I'll live with life with no regrets.
No regrets. We kind of just touched on it. I think one of my biggest regrets is, like, that avoiding some tough conversations with people. The fact that me avoiding tough conversations to protect myself allowed or got in the way of people following Jesus. Like, whether that meant not wanting to have a tough conversation with someone, and they might be mad at me, but they're going to be better for it.
Yep.
And that's part of my role as a leader. Or if it was holding other people in leadership accountable, and then that ended up hurting people down the road, and, like, my inability to have a tough conversation played a part in, like, other people getting hurt, and me trying to protect myself and avoid awkwardness or whatever it might be, like, that actually, like, ended up hurting others. It's
Yes.
like, that's the hard part of like accountability, or a hard part of leadership that really sucks.
Yeah. I'm not
When you
gonna-
are part of the church hurt, when you are part of the problem.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, sometimes there's helpful hurt, and I think that's another thing that can be confused, where it's like you should be getting hurt by your church. Like Jesus consistently hurt people's feelings, and
Like healthy offense, yeah.
to that. I think it was KB on his podcast was talking about, if you have figured out how to communicate the gospel in a way that doesn't offend anyone, you
You're
have
doing it
figured
wrong.
well, you're doing it wrong. He said you have figured out something Jesus couldn't figure out, Paul couldn't figure out, Peter
Yeah.
couldn't figure out. Like,
Right.
to that point, though, I'm not going to quote. I'm not going to say who quoted this because he's a very controversial character. But conflict delayed is conflict multiplied.
Yeah.
And embracing those tough conversations and embracing that conflict, because if you don't, like, it will grow in your pocket, and it will just set a precedent, especially in organizations and in churches where you don't embrace it and call it out, or whatever you want to say it is. Like, provide feedback and say, hey, I think you're better than this. I think you have capacity
Right,
to
yeah.
do better than what happened there. That's that becomes a cultural thing. Take us to the last question, which is, how have you persevered? I look at you and Austin as people who are continually going the distance in ministry, and I don't even say this like apart from church, because even if you guys weren't in part of church, like, you're following Jesus. Like Austin, obviously, got to get him on the podcast at some point, talk through his story, because
Yeah.
he's not in full-time ministry, and yet he is still as very much called and is as much of a minister as he is today than he was a year ago.
Right.
But you guys are following Jesus. How do you persevere and go the distance? Give me a couple bullet points for our community, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing for me is consistently checking my own motives and just being really, really honest with myself about where I'm at. Whether that means like being mad at God, frustrated, whatever, like taking that to Him rather than taking that out on people around me, taking that out on my leaders, whatever it might be, and learning to like actually process with God rather than praying for things as if it's like a list of desires, but like that continual like being really, really honest with God about where I'm at and what I'm struggling with, and checking my motives. I think a lot of forgiveness, whether that was people we were doing ministry with or people that we were pouring our lives out into, and then, you know, it wasn't like reciprocated in the same kind of relationship, and just being like quick to forgive, like believing the best in people, and believing that even when we were the ones that were hurt, that like they may not have been right, but like I hope that their heart was pure too, you know, because like there's been so many times where we look back and we're like, we really believed that was the right way to handle that, and we were wrong.
Yes.
So like when someone else wrongs me, like I hope that was their heart too, and so I'm gonna, you know, try and be quick to forgive.
Yes. Let's close with that thought that you started with the idea of constantly checking your motives, and I think just the idea of just having routine checkpoints in your life as you're following Jesus, whether it is a friend or a pastor or a crew leader or just yourself on a daily basis. Like, I think that's what spending time in the presence of God is a big part of it, is just search my heart, to your point, and just constantly doing that. And it's like it's daily maintenance on the vehicle and taking the vehicle in and making sure, because I think all of our orientation is to coast and just like, hey, this is good, and you just roll. And what happens is, because you bypass those checkpoints, because you're not going in for your oil check. That's where stuff can happen, and it's not that it's irrevocable and you can't be redeemed from it, but it makes it really difficult, because if you don't go and get an oil change for 2 years, I don't even know how long it would take, but you're not checking that, like, there is like a point where, man, it can be tough to rebound from that. It's not that you can't, but it just becomes that much more difficult. And so embracing the inconvenience of constantly looking at things, because I think when you do that, you constantly feel like you're just never there, and you're like, oh, it's because you're always looking under the hood, and there's always something that needs grease. And it's just like, oh, when am I ever? Not till you get to heaven, honey. You know, it's like, but if we can embrace that, man, you can go the distance.
One last thing.
You've got the final word.
I think the other huge factor in that, the other huge factor in that is like surrounding yourself by people that are gonna call you higher, and I don't just mean friends that
encourage
like, talk
you to go
up.
higher.
Yeah, but like people who ask you the good questions.
Yeah.
People in your life that like know you, like really know you, and ask you those types of questions where you're not just, we hang out and we have a good time together. That's great. But do you have those few friends that are gonna ask you those tough questions when you're not willing to ask yourself them?
That's good.
Because we've been really blessed to have amazing people in our lives over the years, and we wouldn't have stuck it out if we didn't. So.
That's amazing. That's the last word. Thanks so much. If you made it this far, you're an amazing person. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation, found something helpful. Enjoy your day tomorrow with friends, family, out on the lake, barbecuing, cooking, baking, or if you're Jackie and Jake Worth, sitting in the house. No, we will be outside, pending that it's beautiful. So we love you, Mix. Can you give it up for Steph? What an amazing conversation. Thankful for you. We'll see you next Sunday.
Thanks for joining us online. We hope this conversation inspired you guys. And if you would like to give to the Mix mission, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can do that first with the link below, or you can do it through the Mix app. And don't forget, we'll actually be back here at the LCA next week at 10 a.m. Hope to see you there. Thanks.